Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast, podcast number 186. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, September the 12th, from the James Strong Studio in western St. Charles County. We live in uncertain times. We've talked about that many times, and everybody has their idea as to what is going to happen with this pandemic. How long is it going to last? How is it going to affect us financially, emotionally, family-wise, work-wise, just how we're doing things, and when is this mess going to be finished? So I thought it would be a good idea to talk to and bring back to the show Teresa Romana Powers. She's a psychic intuitive now out of the tri-state area of New York City. Good morning, Teresa.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm great. And you've been up there in the tri-state area now for about a year or so?
So since the early December, so it's definitely getting there.
Okay. So close to a year. You moved from the Midwest where things are boring, mundane, Americana to arguably the most exciting place in the world. And then the pandemic hit.
Right.
How did that change things?
It's definitely changed quite a bit. We're still seeing a lot of the transition and change as really it's kind of been week to week as far as what that landscape really looks like. When I first moved in December, obviously with the cold weather and everything, the big focus was getting settled in, a new home and environment. And then I was really looking forward to, honestly, as spring was coming, because I was like, great, the weather's going to start to warm up. I can start to really explore the area, hit the city, and find some of my local haunts and places I'd like to enjoy. And then the pandemic happened. So it really put a complete shift and change in even what I was envisioning, the transition to look like for myself, just simply moving to a different area.
Well, and your part of the country was hit, one of the first places that was hit, and also one of the most cases, the most deaths. You guys were really hit really harder than any place in the country.
Yeah, definitely. And that was where, I really commend this area because, again, this is really history in the making. A lot of us haven't been around when a pandemic happened, and especially anything along these lines. And so as it was really unfolding, and we were really learning along the way, everybody was very responsive here. Really, everybody playing their part, putting masks on, socially distancing. And it was really kind of also fascinating to see the response throughout the nation. Because even, if I were to take a trip back or talk to my family in the Midwest, there was caution. At the same time, it's kind of like, we're not, what's the big deal, or what's really happening out there. And I can completely relate to where when it's not in front of you or you're not seeing specific examples of it, it's really kind of hard to wrap your head around, what does this look like? And that's one thing that's really been interesting to really kind of see the different perspectives throughout the nation. And then especially now as numbers start to shift and change. But out here in the tri-state area, everybody really did their best to really button down, and really seeing how also the economic impacts have hit here initially first. And we're still feeling quite a bit of that.
Well, and I know it depends on who you talk to, and it depends on, I guess, maybe your opinion or how it affects you personally. But Mayor de Blasio in New York City, Governor Cuomo in New York State, Governor Ted Lamont, governor of Connecticut, some people say they did the right thing. Some say they did the wrong thing. But to be fair, there was no blueprint. Okay, the last time this happened, we did this.
Right, exactly. You're 100% right. And that's where I think, it really gives us an opportunity to take a look at each other as human beings. We only know what we know. We do the best that we can. And I think on an individual level, what's really been heartening to see is that we've all done our best to play our role with what we know. I noticed that right off the bat, even, in the new offices that I work at here, lots of people that are in the offices, very quickly they started to reevaluate their policies and take a look at how do we start to do remote work. And it sounds kind of silly, but some corporations maybe didn't really have a work from home policy that was really in place. So how quickly they spun up new policies and the infrastructure to be able to handle that, to keep everything moving, and most importantly, also try to keep as many people employed as possible. In addition, when it comes to each personal safety. It was nice to see how people were respecting, the 6 feet social distancing and everything along those lines. Even individuals that are kind of like, I don't really maybe know what the big deal is. I think it's maybe just like a flu, but at the same time, I'm going to be careful. I'm going to go ahead and wear a mask. So it's just really interesting. We're all doing the best we can. And again, like you said, there really hasn't been a blueprint, especially for something like this. We can look back at history, and at the same time, this is also very unprecedented.
Well, the other thing is, too, I mean, doing things one way in the Midwest is totally different than in your area. For example, if you live outside of Manhattan, but go into Manhattan for work every day, you're not driving your car like you do here. You're taking rapid transit. You cannot socially distance on a jam-packed train or subway car.
Yep.
And
yeah, definitely.
And you're grabbing, you're probably standing, you're shoulder to shoulder with people. You are grabbing onto a ring or a bar that somebody else has had their COVID hands on. And it's just not the same there than it is here.
You are absolutely right with that. Commuting is a huge thing out here, and it's still a science. I have not 100% learned, especially because, really, everybody's shutting down as much as possible. And then you really look at the fine balance between individuals that are like, I can't not go to work. I have to do whatever I can. And if my place of employment is still open, I need to keep feeding my kids and do the best that I can. So, there was also a high fear level too, because there's that balance of I need to do what I need to do to survive and take care of my family. And at the same time, I'm kind of going into a lion's den of not knowing what the situation is, simply because a lot of people don't have cars. They really rely on that public transit and commuting. So you're 100% accurate with that.
Well, and in that part of the country, though, they do rapid transit and mass transportation and public transportation so much better, so much differently. When I've gone into New York City, the biggest problem I had when I went into New York City, I drove a car, and the biggest problem I had and the biggest expense that I had was parking the car.
Right.
It was
absolutely.
This was 25 years ago, maybe longer. And I parked the car in just outside of Battery Park, and then I walked north. And it cost $30 to park the car. Okay, that was then. Lord knows what it costs now.
That would be a good price.
Yeah, and I mean, everything else was cheap. I mean, it cost a lot of money to cross that bridge too. But lunch was not expensive. Snacks, drinks, going in to see things, nothing was really too terribly expensive except parking the car. So every other time I've gone, I just take the train in. And the trains and the subways are really, they're very easy to take because Manhattan it's grid work. It's north and south, and the streets are not winding streets like out here, and it's easy to take rapid transit. However, it's hard to stay 6 feet away from anybody because everybody takes rapid transit and everybody's right next to each other. And there are 8, 10, 12 million people in New York City, something like that.
Yeah.
So if you go, and you have to go into work because you've got to pay the bills, and while you should social distance, it's impossible to social distance all the time. So there's danger lurking.
Right. And that's definitely what added to a lot of, the anxiety and the fear level. And you're right. It's a very different environment up here when it comes to things like the transit and everything along those lines. We did see quite a bit of, again, a lot of the corporations and companies that were able to shift over to, working from home or remote work, that helped to alleviate some of it. But again, there's still so many other jobs and employers that, again, there is no way to be able to shift to that. Very quickly, we saw also, are you essential workers? things along those lines that, as the environment continually changed, the policy, or really, what we were all doing to play our part also definitely changed in a very short period of time. And that causes a lot of disruption and uncertainty for people.
And you bring up that key word, essential worker. I have to say that if I have any job, now my day job, of course, we were deemed essential workers from the start because we manufacture wet wipes, or not wet wipes. We manufacture tooling that goes into manufacturing wet wipes and surgical gowns and masks. So, of course, we were essential because if you don't have our stuff, you can't make those products, and you needed those products. However, I don't care what you do. I'm going to say my job is essential because people need my product or service, and it's kind of essential that I get a paycheck.
Exactly. And that's what we also saw quite a bit of. It was, you really would see the struggle of individuals, again, going back to a previous mention where it's like, I have to feed my kids. I've got to pay the rent. And obviously in this area, it's a very high rent, especially in comparison to the Midwest area. Every little bit counts. I would hear of some individuals that would start, taking a look at, is there a different type of job that maybe I can get that was still hiring? So you would also kind of see individuals that would try to look at, is there something else I can shift over to really quick before maybe hiring, starts to freeze or shut down? And people also working multiple jobs, how and what that really looked like for them. And you could really see that personal struggle. We would also see quite a bit of community involvement, which you'd see more coming into food banks, community services like that, where individuals that were employed, would also start, contributing even more to organizations like that, knowing there is a lot of other families out there that maybe were unemployed or whatever it may be. So that's, I think, one of the things that we can also look to, whether it's a fire, a lot that's going on over in the West there, or, floods or hurricanes, tornadoes, is one of the great things that we do see with humanity is that we do our best to also pull together with what we have, which is really, refreshing to be able to see.
We mentioned earlier in the broadcast that this is unprecedented. We don't know where it's going to go because really, sure, we had the Spanish flu in, what was it, 1918 or something like that. But let's be honest, there's only a handful of people who were alive back then. So really, there's no blueprint for what we're doing. Here's the $64,000 question. You are a psychic intuitive, which means you see things that other people don't see. Plus, you're a smart individual. To those of the listeners who are out there saying, "Wow, I don't know where this is going to lead us." In fact, I had a conversation with a listener who said, "Wow, when are you going to have that Teresa Romana Powers, psychic intuitive, back on the air?" I thought, you know what, this is a perfect time because what have you seen? What do you think? Because you have gifts that others don't have, so I don't want to put you on the spot and say, okay, look into your tarot cards and tell us exactly where we're going to be 6 months from now. But what's your view, your prediction, your estimate as to where this is going to lead us and what we can do to, if nothing else, calm our minds during this mess?
Right. And that's, a pretty heavy question. And even as,
but it's a question that everybody wants to know. Absolutely. Right. Everybody.
Right. And, even as this started to, even in the very beginning, I was really curious as to what would happen or, how it would start to impact would I get an influx of clients that, out of that anxiety and fear, wanted to be able to have something to hold on to, because that's really where a lot of us are at also, as well as what are the impacts to my own well-being and personal self when it comes to how am I emotionally navigating and mentally navigating through all the shift and transition and change that's been happening. I was really surprised to see that I didn't have a lot of customers that were coming through like, when am I going to get this next job or things along those lines. It was really, a lot of it was kind of, business as usual when it came to the clients that would come to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it came to me putting my feelers out there as far as what is this really going to look like and how are we going to navigate through this, I personally haven't felt any need to have to, put my feelers out there as to when is this going to end, or